This is React props, and we had the props demo, which we were working on yesterday. Let me change. Left zoom. Disable this. Cool. So we had this yesterday. We were trying to build this UI where we had a big component, a container component also called, that we call product page, that had an array of product objects, and we also had a smaller component that will help us render a specific item that we call product item. And we have these two components here. The products page is a stateful component. It has state. In state, we have a products array of product items. And then we have product item here that is a functional component that receives these props through the props argument, and is just creating an li with all the information in like just one line. Also, it had a button that we added yesterday. This was where we left off yesterday. How can we have this button sort of affect the parent component? And this is, for instance, here in, as we can see here, for the product item. Also, let me share this link so that you can access my VS Code. I'll just share that link so that you can access my VS Code and see all the code that I have. And we can see here how we were passing props. So product item to product item, we're currently passing 6 props that are part of the product, right? All these props are primitive values like strings. The name is string. The price is a number. Quantity is a number. And then we were thinking about, so what we want now is we have a button. Every product item that we're representing here with this tree, every product item has a button, and we want that button to update the state of the parent component. And we want to do that so that, imagining we have sort of like an inventory. Let's run this app to see it. So imagining we have an app with an inventory that when people click the purchase button or the buy button, we want the inventory to go down, right? So the question is, how do we have a child component? If we think of the inventory currently lives in the product page, right? This is where we have the products array with all the elements, with all the items. In here, what we want to do, let me put this on the side. In state, we have this array of products. Each one has an object. Each element in it has an object that has some properties. One of those is quantity, and we want the user, when the user clicks the button purchase or buy, for this quantity to go down, simulating the actual purchase. Then the problem that we're facing is the button currently lives in the product item, right? But this button that lives in the product item needs to change the state of the parent component. So how do we do that? The answer is the parent component will pass in a function to the child component. Then that function because that function will live in the parent component. That function will be able to set the state, right? We know that we can only set the state. We can only set the state in the current component, or in the component that has the state, right? Or in other words, it's like only the component that has state can update the state. What the component that has state, what this component is going to do for letting other components update its state is sort of like lending them a function, giving them a function that they can call to set the state. So this component will give a function to the child component, and that function, because it's coming from the parent, can set the state. Then the child can just call that function to set the state. And that is the basic mechanism. So let's sort of review what we had here. We had on the products page, we have a function, this one, handle by click, right? This function, for now, is just console login button was clicked. And this function that lives in the products page component has access to the state. It has access to everything that the product page has. And now this function, we're passing the handle by click, we're passing to the product item component as a prop call handle by click. We're passing that function just as if it was any other data, if it was a string or if it was a number. We just this is sort of the component handing down that function to the child for the child to use, for the child to call. So the parent component hands that function down, then the child component will receive that function in the props argument. And in here, we're just using that function as our click handler if we look at this button. We're saying, okay, whatever function the parent gave, let's just use that as our handle click here. We have props that handle by click. What this is saying is that whenever we click that button in the child, that function will be called in the parent. And we are going to see the console log popping up. This one. So let's go back here. If we open the developer tools, go to the console, then we can click on buy, and we see that. So this is why I keep saying that I like to think of props as that mechanism of communication between a child and its parent, right? So this is the products page handing down a function that then we call on click on that button that lives in the child, and that function can affect the parent component. So far we haven't, it's not affecting the parent component, but this is just a demonstration of a component passing down a function and then calling that function from within the child. Cool. Questions to this point about props in general, maybe passing in a prop that is a function. Yep.
Why is it props in product item but this in the products page?
So it's because when we have what I said earlier, when we have a functional component, we receive props here as an argument to the function. But when we have a class is not a function, the props will be available under this .props. Shara?
Yesterday, when you click the button, it says like Ultra Boost button click or Air Force button click. Now it's not like that. Is it better if we were more specific?
That's correct. So it will be better if we're able to identify like what button specifically was clicked. So the thing, we're gonna get around that, and we had it like that because that was the first step that I showed, where that function, the handle button click, lived in the product item component. So I had defined it like here. something like const handle by click. So I had it defined here, and I was just giving it from here to my button on click handler. So that was that one. Then what we did was, instead of having that function, or the reason why we moved this function to the parent is because this function at this point here doesn't have access to the state of the parent, which is ultimately what we want to do, right? We want to update the state in the parent. So I took that function from here, and then I moved it to the parent, and then the parent is just handing that function down through props to the child. Now let me see the way that we implemented it here. Products page. We have buy single product. Okay. Cool. So what we have here is, I'm going to deviate a little bit from the original here, because this anonymous function that we have the on click, it's fine, and we could use it like this as it is here, but we better see it a little bit more broken down. So let's do this. So what we have is, I'm going to have two. We're going to have two functions. One that lives in the parent component, which is called handle by click, and another one that will live on the product item, on the child component. And the one that lives in the child component, the only thing that it's going to do is just call the one in the parent component. So sort of like this. So note here how we were putting in the function that came from the parent through props directly here. What we're going to do is just this. Remove that one, use the one that we have in the component, in the child component, and the one that is in the child component, the only thing that it's going to do is just call the one in the parent component. Props that handle, what do you call it, handle by click. Just like this. So if I go back to my page, everything should just work exactly the same. Because what I did was, I have two functions, one that lives in the child component, another one that lives in the parent component. The parent is giving that function down to its children, and the function that lives in the children is just invoking the function that lives in the parent. So let's see if we have an illustration for this. The benefit, is something that I feel like is hard to appreciate at first, or hard to see at first, is to get back to what Gerard was saying, like how do we identify which purchase button was clicked. So it's about like, yeah, I think as we progress, maybe we're going to start to see that. Yeah. So what we have is, we have here the parent component, and we have the child component here. Right? Now the parent component is handing down a function to the child called handle by click. This child has a function called handle click that the only thing that it's doing is just calling the function with parent, right? So if we go back to the page, oops, handle by click is not a function. Oh, I have a spelling mistake. Handle. Cool. So we have this again. The button is clicked. That is just because the function that the parent is giving to the child is just calling in another function, handle click here. Right. The thing why we did this is because the child has access to the name of the item that is rendering, right? Like we could do something like this. In here we could do console.log props.name. We could do we console log the name. This console log is coming from the function that is in the child, right? And then the other console log comes from the function that is in the parent, right? So the individual product item has access to the name of the product that was clicked, right? To the specific product that was clicked. Because if I click a different button, now I get a different name, right? What we want to do is pass in this name to the function in the parent, for the parent to have access to the name of the item whose button was clicked, right? So that the parent has access to the name of the item that was clicked. So another way of seeing it is like the parent component has access. The parent component has the array of products, right? So it has all of them, but it has no way as of now to tell which button was clicked. It has access to all the items, and every item has a button associated to it, but it has no way of knowing which button was clicked. Right? So what we're going to do is, because the single component, the child, has access to like what name the product has, what we're going to do here is just pass in that name here. So let's do something like this. Let's do let item name equal props.name, and then we are just going to pass the item name. So I just have a variable item name that is going to store the individual product name, and what it's going to do is it's going to call the function in the parent with that name, so that we know on which button we clicked, what item we want to buy. Now our handle by click will have here then now the item name. And if we console log button was clicked item name, we sort of get back to what we saw earlier when the function lived in the child. and we're doing this because the parent has all the products, but the parent has no way to tell which button was clicked. Now we have the name of each product, of each single individual product on every children. Well, the one is, I like to think of this as information that is the name of the product lives in the child, right? Even though it came from the parent originally, right? But now that name lives in the child. Now, how do we get that name sort of back up to the parent to be able to tell which button was clicked? The button for which item was clicked. Like,
we set a value to the button. So button that fits in that click on it, we just use the then target value.
Right, that is another approach, of course. Like if we remember that you're probably using like IDs or class names or even names to store information directly on the element, right? That would be another way of getting that information from the children to the parent. I will say both are okay. I do find this one a little bit more common, especially because you don't want to put a lot of information like on the DOM itself, especially if it's information that might be sensitive, right? Because when you name on Michael's approach, when you put information on the element, like say on the button, then anyone inspecting the DOM will be able to see that information. And for this case, it doesn't really matter. We can put it on the name. But on this fashion, we don't need to do that. So the way I like to think about this is that the name of the item that was clicked lives on the single child. How do we get that back out to the parent for the parent to be able to tell what button was clicked? And this is then how we can do that. We have a function in the child that is calling a function in the parent. That is calling a function that came from the parent through props. Now the child can hand the child can hand the name to that function that came from the parent, and now the parent has access to whatever that name is. So this is confusing because like information is going, like the function is going from the parent, it's going to the child, and then the function is bringing information back to the parent, right? This one is like the first way going down is like the function, the handle by click. Now when this one calls that function, it's sending information sort of back to the parent. And if we have this, then we go back to here, refresh this page. We now have that the function that lives in the parent, because it's being called from within the child with the argument that is the name of the product, then the function in the parent has access to the name of the item, to something to identify what button was clicked. Right? This is the exact same thing that we did here in the lecture. It's just that here we define that function. We define this function straight into the onClick. This has some like performance implication that is not like very relevant now. But this is sort of a little bit more common. Cool. So once we have the name of the item that was clicked, what we need to do now is just, okay, we have the name of the item that was clicked. Let's just loop over, let's find that element in the array, and let's lower the quantity on every click. But before we move there, any questions up until this point? Yes, Savita. In this fashion? No, for two reasons. So one is the the parent the parent component is not expecting props from anywhere else, right? Say that again. Oh, got it. So yes, but as long as that variable declaration is within a function, so you can do that like in the render, like here. You can do let a equal to. As long as the variable declaration is within a function, that is like render, handle, click, or even the constructor, you can do that. You can't do it like here. B equal 3. Because this place here is for defining functions for the class. Mm-hmm. Yes, I could do it here. Because in here, like, you can think of it like you're not allowed to define variables straight in the class. Like, if we remember the scope or like the indentation levels, here at this point, you see this line here? This means we are inside of the class, right? We're inside of the class and we're not inside of any function within the class. Or another way to look at it is, let's say you have the class, right? And then you have some functions in the class. You even have like state. You can only define variables within these functions. Here, within one of these functions that are inside of the class, I can say let whatever I want. How would you achieve that same thing though? How would you achieve let I make equal props that name if you were to do it in the handle by? But if we're involving props, then it becomes a different story because we'll need to think about, so if we plan to use like props in the parent, that means that there is some higher component that is like the parent of the parent that is going to pass in props to the parent. That means like there is something higher up here that will pass in something to the parent, right? Which at this point we don't have. I think I saw another hand around here. Cool. So the way in which you pass, sort of like summarize, the way in which you pass information from the parent to the child is through props. The way in which you pass information from the child to the parent is through a function that goes through props from the parent to the child, and then the function carries sort of up the information to the parent. Which, say that again? Well, both are needed. It's not like you can pick one or the other. So it's like that's why I sort of like said like this. Like props are the mechanism for communication between parent and child, right? And the first thing that we saw is like the communication in one direction, which is the parent giving a bunch of information to the child. Now we're looking at the other way of communication. How can the child give information to the parent? And the way in which the child can give information to the parent is through a function that the parent gives the child, and then the child calls with whatever information it needs. So I'm trying to come up with like an analogy for these. Anybody has like an analogy for? I'm trying to think of the relationship between like when a parent gives something to the child so that the child can do something that it couldn't do otherwise. Money, right? But it will also need to be sort of like an action though, because when we think of functions, we think of actions. Um, Yeah, that is a very good example. Yeah, but without the money, the child cannot do anything, right? Um, so it's that is a good analogy, because like on one direction, the parent can give anything to the child, right? Like candy, whatever the child needs, the parent can give like easily. But for the child to do something for the parent, that child will need the money and will need instructions as to what to do, right? So you can think of it sort of like that way.
Wait, so what's the function?
In this case, like the money function is the handle by click, and the grocery shopping is like, or the groceries is the item name. Yeah, it's like it's like another example, but this might be too contrived. Um, Imagine like, so a parent can give anything to the children, right? Candy, money, uh, new car, whatever. But let's say the parent wants the child to catch a butterfly, right? Unless, let's say the child cannot do anything by itself, or it needs instruction, it needs tools. So the parent will need to give the child. So if the parent wants the child to get a butterfly for the parent will need to give the child a butterfly catcher. And in this case, like our butterfly catcher is like this handle by click. It's like sort of like an instrument that the parent gives to the child for the child to do something and bring it back to the parent. Mm-hmm. Say that again? The Sims? Like, yeah, yeah. Cool. So just remember that the way in which the parent can give anything, can pass anything to the children through props, to just plain props, right? It can pass in this case, it's passing in the name, the manufacturer, the quantity, and that is like a unidirectional communication. The parent communicating with the child. Now, if we want the opposite, which is the child communicating with the parent, how we achieve that is the parent giving a function to the child, and then the child calls with extra information that we may want in the parent. In this case, the information that we want to have available in the parent is the item name. We want this information because we want to uniquely identify what specific button was clicked. So from here, what we can do is then a simple search algorithm that is just going to iterate over the products and then update the state. Let's see what we have here for that algorithm. Okay, so actually let me just copy this and we can talk about what this is doing. I think I have. So let's look at what this is doing. Let's first destructure the products that we have from state here. So let's do const products equal this dot state, so that we can do this. So what we're doing here is looping over the products and searching where we have a match in the name. We have an array of products, and we're searching where we have a match in the name. Also, this name will need to be item name here. So we are iterating over the products with the map function, and we're checking if the current product name matches the item name, meaning it matches the name of the button or of the item with the button that was clicked, and the quantity is greater than 0. Oh, this one is QTY on my implementation. Then what we want to do is return this new object, where this object is exactly the same as the one that we were currently iterating over, has the same name, the manufacturer, the same price, but on this one we are decreasing the quantity by 1. Now note that this return statement here, this return statement is for the map function. This return statement is for the map function. If the names don't match, what we want to do is just return the same product. And I think that this might be the most or the most difficult to get. So what we're doing here is we're mapping the original array of all the products. In the map, we're going to map that original array to another array that has the exact same thing, but where one object, the one that was clicked on, has the quantity lowered. So we're taking the array of products that we have, and we're going to map it to the exact same array. Like, it will be like making a copy. This is the efficient what we're doing. Like this map, if you remember, and I hope you do, map returns a new array, right? And what we're doing is we have our array of products, and we're going to create, this map is going to create a new array out of the array of products where whatever the product that match on this if statement is different with the quantity lower, right? So once we have this new array where the object that contains the product that we modified was changed, then we set the state with that new array. And that's what we're doing here. Like this is that set state. We set the products property to now be the new state product. And this is something that you are going to develop a sense for as we move forward, where if you have like nested things in your state, updating them will be hard. Like in this case, like we cannot just key into the element that we clicked in and just set the property, set the quantity to be equal to the same minus 1. That worked? You didn't have to do the map?
Like in the product item, JS bar, on the on click, I just put quantity minus minus.
Oh, I see.
That actually changed the actual quantity.
So Okay, yeah, so that works. Well, that works, but only visually, not really in the state. So you, right, but it's not gonna work like in your state. Your state is not changing. In your state, you still have the same quantity, and then that's where you get out of sync, as we talked earlier, between what you have in state in your component and what the user is seeing. And we want those two things to always be in sync. We want the state to be in sync with what the user is seeing. So yours works visually, but it's not really modifying the state, which is what we want. So whenever you're setting the state, just remember that you have to set the state with a new state, a brand new state. You can't just modify parts of the state. You are setting the state with a brand new state. So if you want to keep anything that you had in state, what you're going to do is you make a copy of the previous state, you modify that copy, and you set that copy of the state to be your new state. And this is effectively what we're doing here with the products. Even though we want to change only one item, the one that was clicked on, we need to make a copy of every single item. The one that was changed, we change the quantity to be lowered by 1. And then we set all those products back into the state. And this one, this is okay. It's a little bit inefficient in the sense that whenever I click on the buy, well, I guess let's look at this. Let's see if this works first before we go any further. The render is not inside the class. Thank you. I think it's because I have an extra. Yeah, I had an extra curly bracket. So let's try this. Buy. Oh, it went to 0. Oh, it just disappeared. But this is because I have a spelling mistake here. This is QTY. And this is QTY for my case. So let's maybe open this one here on the side so you can see it. So refresh. Now when I click it, it's changing in the state. And it's doing a lot of work because every time that I click, a new array gets created where one object is different. When one object has a lower quantity. You can even see it here. So I'm going to get rid of this console log. And then I'm going to, let's see if this works. Let's do console log. I'm going to say old, and I'm going to console log the products, which is the all, sort of our all part of state. And then I'm going to console log new, which is going to be the new state products. I'm going to abbreviate just these two new products. New products. So new state products. So look what happens when I click on one. I click on one and I get the all products state, which is an array of 4 elements, and I get the new one, which is an array of 4 elements again. But they are different on only one element, on only one property. So if we go at the all, we see that I don't remember which one was the one that I clicked on. I think it was the first one. I think I clicked on the ultra boost, and we can see here the quantity is 5. Right? What this code is doing here is creating with a map, creating a copy of the all one, modifying one element, and returning that new element, so that new element or that modified element is in the new one. So we can see here that I think that's the first one. The quantity is 5. Now when I go to the new one, the quantity is 4. And all the rest are the same. The others are the same. And if we think about it, like this is a little bit inefficient. The fact that for every click, a new array is being created, right? A way in which you could optimize this is if instead of storing the products in an array in the state, we just keep the products on the state itself, right? Without being in an array where every product, maybe we have the keys where names of the product are the keys in the state, and that will like get rid of this. But this is still something that we have to see because it's very common, where you have a list and you need to update something in the list. So that's like something. It sort of takes some time to get used to, like the way in which we do things in React, which is we cannot just, like we have this array in state, we can't just key into the index and change the property. We need to set the state in React. And what that means is if you want to keep anything that you had in state or in a property of the state, you will need to make a copy somehow. Modify the thing that you want to modify, and just set that new copy with the thing that was modified back into the state. Yeah. And the thing is, like, well, also, if you think about the fact that when you're setting the state with this .set state, you're passing in a new state, right? So the example, I think we had a previous example, but like if I do set state and I set a new, I pass in an object that has a key different than products, then my state will have now two keys. You will have the products and you will have the other key, right? And what set state is doing is looking at the current state and is looking at the object that is coming in the argument and is going to combine those two. It combines those two objects, the state, the current state, and the one that you pass in as an argument to the set state. So you can combine the state there. But if you're doing work that is nested, that is like further down, like in this case where we have the key products, but inside of the products we have an array, then React doesn't know how to combine those. Like it cannot, you can think of it as React combines states one level deep. But it doesn't do more than one level. Like for further levels, you will need to do it yourself, like what we're doing here, which is copying what we had there, modifying the copy, and then setting that new modified copy to be the new part of state. And then what we have here now is that button lives in the child, but the parent gave a function to the child so that when the button is clicked, that function gets called in the parent. The parent can set the state. Once the parent sets the state, what happens when you do set state? What's immediately the next thing that happens? Render happens again. Render happens again, which means that the children render again. And that's why we see like updating immediately. Because when we click, the state was updated, the children was updated, the children now, all children were like removed, and the new number comes in, and we see it like updating like that. This is something that when we can't experience just with HTML. I think I saw a question in the back. Sorry, Hugh, maybe? Cool. Got it. Yes, Peter. No, if I refresh the page, the quantity goes back to the initial state, yeah. That's because we're not persisting this information anywhere. We're not persisting it like to local storage or to a cookie or to a backend. Yeah, this is sort of like, yeah, that's correct. This is like if you had like a global variable in your front end. When you refresh, that goes back. Yeah. Yep.
Only because the alerts popped up. What are the two things you're console logging again? It's new state products for old, right? No.
So for all just products and new products. New products. Oh, I changed the name of new product. Before it was called new state products, something like that. Yeah. Other questions? So I think so. Let's do an exercise, and we're gonna need more time for the lab. But I want to make sure that we're starting to develop a feeling for this. So what we're gonna do is, as practice for this, go to your clicker game. What we're going to do, so we did everything in one component, right? We have the event listener on the same like one component, and it's updating the state, and we see it refreshing. So what we're going to do now is we're sort of going to have two components. We're going to have something like this. So we have, I think this is probably how most of you implemented it. We have the page, maybe there's like a number here, and then I think there's like a plus and a minus button to like basically increase this number, right? You click this button and it increases this number, you click the other button and it decreases the number, right? You must have something like similar to this. I saw that some of you like were trying to actually build a game with some power apps, but you basically have something that you click it and the state updates, then it re-renders and it shows you the increase. So what we're gonna do now is, what I want you to do is, we're gonna take this to its own component. We're gonna take the buttons to its own component. So let's say we have, let's say we have the main component, let's call like game. This is like this component, right? And then this other component, we can call it just buttons. Now, buttons will be a child of the game component. And what we want to do, like what I want you to do with this, before we move into the lab, is just to exercise the fact that for these buttons that now live in its own component to alter the state of the parent, we're going to need, the parent is going to need to pass in a function to the child for the child to use to set the state in the way that we do. And this is another one of those React patterns where for a child to set the state of its parent, the parent must pass in a function to the child through props for us to be able to do that. So then start doing that. Just create another, for that project, I don't remember exactly which one, let's see, state, for React State. Just create another component. Create another component called buttons and move your buttons, only your buttons, move it to that component. Then you import the buttons component into your game component, into your main component, maybe app, whatever you call it. Yeah, this game component could just also be just app, game or app. And then we're gonna have the problem oh, but these buttons were set in the state on the app, but now they live in a different component. How do we do that? We do that by passing the parent passing a function to the child. So let's take like 5 minutes, create another component called buttons, and just put your buttons in that component. This component, in fact, it should be a functional component. It's not going to have state. So create a new file, buttons.jsx, define a component called buttons as a functional component, and then move your buttons to that component. If you have only one button, that's fine. The fact that React will compare the virtual DOM with the real DOM. Will compare functions, and it's going to copy only where the that's faster than otherwise. No, this is sort of for a class practice. So you go back to the stage. Yeah, that's what I mean. Yep. That's fine. Just move the image to another component called. I'll call it. I'll also show complex. What we're gonna do is like display the have that button, or you have an image that works on like a button. We're just gonna have that. Leaving its own components and figure out how can we set the state of the app by clicking down that other component. So just move your. Let's see which one is your button. Okay. Okay, so we're going to need to those just for now, just not to show your image in the wing screen.
Okay.
Is that like? I guess like.
I mean, it's fine if it disappears. It's actually supposed to be deactivated. There's no remove place. You can't keep playing. You got to reset to start playing.
In this case, since you're basically repeating yourself all the way, what we can do is like turn right instead of having to repeat ourselves, we can do like what is the yeah, this is an interesting case because like this case we're going to use summaries to say like if the user wants here, if the user wants then show this, show you win. Otherwise show whatever else you prefer. And even for the if the user won, then we want to attach nothing as the event listener. Otherwise, attach the regular event listener. Because like it would be good to event like maybe after if you have time, if you go over it to see how you can clear that organization.
Right.
Yep.
No, take it. Yeah.
Because you're saying so it's so then you are making states in a way that is not how React does it. Like always, right? You have the reference states, but you're literally modifying that. It's sort of the same as the same. This that state that part. So you're doing the same thing, just like with some why people modify the original already. Yeah. That's React is I guess like maybe like checking for you will be harder. Well, check if you're modifying that. The thing is like because yeah like you're yeah this is a little bit funny because like conceptually this product is someplace in my organ, right? Right, so like you say the reference all references to the new but it's not going to the reference is still the I think I could send you a link that you could read. Later on, remind me to. There's an article that you can read. So let's look at what you needed to do here. So here, what I asked you to do was to let me show you the app that I have. It's this. I have a plus and a minus. They update the state. They are setting the state. And we did like this change theme, but that doesn't matter. What matters is this. So what we don't. This one is sort of easy because we have the buttons in the same component that is in app where we have the event listers. So the challenge now is to take these buttons. I'm literally going to cut them from here. I'm going to open a new file, create a new file. I'm going to paste them here. Just save this file for now. Let's call it buttons.jsx. And then I want on this buttons.js, we want to import React from React. Then I said that this component can be a functional component, so let's just do const buttons equal this. And we know that this function needs to return some JSX, some React components. So something like this. Oh, also, remember that when you're returning something from a component, you need it to be wrapped in a single element. So we can wrap it here in a div. Now remember that you could also wrap it in React fragment, which is just like this. These two work. They work the same way. I think somebody shared an article on Slack about the differences. You just remember that whenever you're returning some JSX for a component, it needs to be wrapped in one thing, whether that's a div, a paragraph, or this React fragments. So the next thing is, let's do export not export.default, just export default buttons. So we have that here. Let's put it here to the side. What I'm going to do here now on my app, which is my main component, is just import buttons from, I think I didn't create a components folder. I just put it in the same source folder, so you need to say current folder / buttons, and then put my buttons right here. So raise your hand if you did something like this. Cool. Okay, great. So this visually will be the same thing, right? Like if I go here, oh well, I got some errors. That's because I'm using some functions that are not defined here. Let me remove this from here. So that's the first error. Is like now we don't have this function handle change theme or handle plus or handle minus. They don't exist on the buttons file, right? So they're undefined. Let me just remove them for now. As I go here, buttons, we have another error. Parsing error, JSX attributes must be assigned a non-empty expression. What this is saying is I cannot have these empty things. So let me remove those as well. We're going to have to put them back. And here, visually, we have the same thing. Right? But none of the buttons work now. The buttons don't work because we don't have event listeners attached to it. And even if we had, then we'll need to make sure that those event listeners are changing the state of the parent. Right? So basically what we have here now is going back to this. In the parent, which is app.js, we have the counter. The child, which is the buttons, we have just the buttons. Then here we go back to the question, which is how can the child modify the state of the parent? Because we want that when we click that button, the child to plus or minus, we want the state in the parent to change from 0 to 1, 2 to 3, and if we're clicking the minus, the other way. So this is like, and you're going to find this like very often as you're creating React apps, which is how can the child modify the state of the parent? And here we find that problem. If we want to make modular apps that we're able to break down into multiple components, we're going to be comfortable with this pattern, which is what we're going to see about how to have the child modify the state of the parent. And then, as I said earlier, the way in which the child can modify the state of the parent is if the parent gives the child a function that the child can call, and that function will change the state of the parent. So in here, for this project, we had, let me share this also if you want to have access to the code through VS Code. This is like the other VS Code that I have open. So here, like, we could think of the child being disconnected from the parent, right? And we want to allow that communication. So what we're going to do is what I said earlier. The parent needs to hand down a function to the child for the child to call. What function is that going to be? These functions that we already have here. The handle change theme and the handle, not the handle change theme. We're not going to take care of that. But we're going to take care of the handle click for the minus and the handle click for the plus. Right? So the parent must hand down these functions for the children to call. In this case, what we can do is, we know that from the child we want to set the state of the parent, so let's pass in those two functions. Let's call it like handle click. And handle minus click. For the handle click, what we're going to pass is the function in the class with the same name, which is that handle click. And for the minus, we're going to say that handle minus click. So now the parent is effectively handing down those functions. Now the child has access to those functions through props, then the child can just call them. In this case, what we can do is just say here, on click. Oh, first of all, even before we do that, we need this. We need to specify the props argument because we're now going to be we're going to be making use of them. So then I'm going to say on click. The function that we want to call when this button is clicked is the one that comes through props as props that handle click. And the function that we want to call when the minus button is called is the one that came through props. Call props that handle minus click. Also note here that we don't invoke those functions. We don't want to invoke the functions. You just hand them to the button. And now our components will work again. If we go back here. Now this component, the buttons component that is a child of the app, can set the state of the parent because the parent gave a function to the children to do so. Like the child cannot do anything with the parent unless the parent gives the child a function for the child to call. So for modularizing your apps, breaking your apps in components is one part. The second part is having them communicate, right? Having the parent give information to the child for rendering stuff, and also the child, if needed, being able to change state in parent. Questions about this one?
What did we need to remove from handle click to make this work?
From the handle click, so we didn't need to touch these functions. We didn't need to touch these functions. What we did was I just called the buttons component, and we pass in two props. Those two props are the functions that are going to allow the child to set the state in the parent. And then the buttons component is just basically handing those down to the actual button for the button to fire when the click event happens. Are you getting any error?
I tried to get rid of a lot of things I had to go through. The only thing I'm trying to affect right now is
So show me.
so I built this graph. So it's just the image.
Okay.
The beyond so you can sponsor handles.
Got it. Now show me what you call me threats. Where do you call the component?
In the positive.
Here, that's the thing. You're not passing the parsing. Now you need to passing that function with the same name that you specified on the other side. I think so.
Hammer click so
Yeah.
is it okay that it's also
Yeah, that's sort of. You just do handle click equal this dialog click. Oh yeah. Okay, that's a different error. I think we had. Do we have this problem before where this was null? Do you have if you have an app as a function, well actually you can't really have it as a function because you're going to set, you need the state to be camera. So app will need to be, in this example, app is a class. That state. And therefore it has a this. So this comes. Cool. So everyone got it to work? Any questions? Just raise your hand. There's a line you can run. Every time you go.
When they come of age, they just like
So if you couldn't get it to work, just raise your hand and then we can assist you.
It's like